In this unit, we will explore the period of Greek history known as the Archaic Age, a developmental phase that is keenly important in the overall rebuilding of Greek civilization after the catastrophic collapse of the Bronze Age Mycenaean civilization. Now, just a note on terminology. As your Martin text indicates, Archaic Age is an art history term used to describe the type of art that has been recovered and dated to the period between 750 and 500 BCE, and which art historians felt was archaic or old-fashioned, meaning stiff and not as lifelike as later Greek sculpture would be in representing the human form. There is, however, a more useful way to conceptualize the Archaic Age, and that is by recognizing that in Greek, the root of the term archaic, arche, means beginning or origin, and indicates that after the murkiness of the Dark Ages, something new is being created. Indeed, during the Archaic period, the Greeks basically have to reinvent their notion of what civilization is. And it's during the Archaic Age that certain foundational components are invented and refined. So in this unit, we'll look at three pivotal developments. First, we'll look at the development of the polis, or city-state, as the primary model of social, political, and economic organization across ancient Greece. Next, we'll take a look at the wave of overseas colonies that the Greeks will establish. And finally, we will look at the development of a way of warfare that depended on warriors known as hoplites, citizen farmers who would, when the time was necessary, would suit up in very specific equipment and fight for their polis, their city-state. And again, these were non-aristocratic citizens who will defend the polis, and in doing so, gain a real voice in the government of their city-state. So let's first begin by looking at the development of the polis, the city-state. The term polis, which is often translated as city-state, will be the building block by which the Greeks will organize themselves politically, culturally, and economically for the next several centuries. It is important to note that the polis is much more than a geographical location. Indeed, the Greeks looked at the polis as a place where, as the philosopher Aristotle put it, man could reach his full potential by developing his political self. Now, if we step back for a moment and take a look at how the Mycenaean Bronze Age civilization was organized, we recognize a very centralized and very stratified society, and you had relatively few people who were in positions of authority and power, and they lived the good life, and everybody else answered to this ruling elite, and political representation was very, very limited. When this Mycenaean civilization collapses, the Greeks now have an opportunity to create civilization 2.0, if you will. And this process will broaden out and expand upon the sense of community created by the Dark Age oikos, and the end result will be the polis, the city-state, which is basically an urbanized center that will contain religious temples and public spaces, such as the agora, the open market area that sometimes also served as a kind of communal assembly area. So again, the urban center is like the beating heart of the polis, and it will be surrounded by, depending on the size of the polis and the territory it controls, it'll be surrounded by tens or hundreds of miles of farmland that will be farmed in many cases by small landowning farmers who will gain a real sense of independence for themselves, and they will also recognize that they have a key role to play if the polis is to survive as a viable entity. So the polis is the model of organization, and to belong to a polis, the Greeks craft the idea of citizenship. And this is perhaps the most important development of the Archaic Age. This notion that free adult males born into the territory controlled by the polis will have some political voice. Now, there still will be some stratification. There still will be those aristoi who are from more esteemed families. They call themselves the eupatridai, the well-born ones. and they will hold great political influence. But as we will see, even the more humble and middling farmer class, the Zoiditai, will have a role to play and ultimately gain a political voice that will only grow as we make our way through the Archaic period. During the 3 centuries of the Archaic Age, hundreds of independent poleis, that is, city-states, will develop throughout Greece. Now, one age-old remedy for peoples who are living in a homeland like ancient Greece, which is limited in natural resources and lacks fertile farmland, one remedy is to expand your holdings well outside the boundaries of your traditional homeland. In the case of the Greeks living during the Archaic Age, an aggressive policy of overseas colonization is going to be adopted. And as you can see from this map, Greek colonists will migrate well beyond the traditional boundaries of what is considered Greece in the ancient period. And this makes sense because we see that once things begin to settle down after the Dark Age, and the Archaic Age is underway, we'll see populations begin to grow. And Greece itself has very limited fertile farmland. It's very hard to support a growing population. Something has to be done with people who are going to be looking for opportunities, and the most adventuresome of these people will willingly take on the mission of colonizing other areas. The Greek colonies established during the Archaic Age were not dispatched all at once, but in successive waves. The Greeks planted their colonies wherever conditions were favorable and local resistance could be overcome. Most of the colonies were founded close to the sea, not inland, but close to reliable sources of fresh water and stretches of fertile farmland. Now, while land hunger and population pressure in Greece spurred the growth of colonies, trade also played an important role, as did the quest for key natural resources, which helped determine where the Greeks looked to colonize. The earliest wave of colonization took place in the mid-8th century, and this was directed towards Italy and the West. The earliest Greek settlements in the Bay of Naples were at the intersection of trade routes from west and north. Soon they were followed by agricultural colonies established in Sicily and southern Italy, which this area over time became known as Magna Graecia, that is, Great Greece. In Magna Graecia, the rich opportunities for trade and colonization resulted in a region of phenomenal wealth that would far outstrip old original Greece. A second wave of colonization took place about a century later to the coasts of the Hellespont and the Black Sea. And this makes sense because this area was known for its extraordinarily rich soil and agricultural fertility. Now, there were some religious and symbolic aspects to founding a new colony. The person who led the colonists to the site of the new colony was known as the oikist, or the katistes, as your Martin text indicates. Before an expedition could set out for the chosen site, the oikist would visit the oracle at Delphi to see if the god Apollo approved of the new colony. The Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, would, in her own cryptic way, express the will of Apollo, and that cryptic message would be deciphered by priests who were on hand to help the petitioner understand what the future held. And the oikist, the leader of this expedition, brought fire from the original polis's hearth to the colony to show its connection to the founding polis. And upon founding the colony, the oikist would be the leader of that new city, that new polis, until his death. And once the colonists arrived at the site, they would, of course, sacrifice to the gods and say prayers over the new site. And the colonists created a plan for distribution of land and the layout of the city. Now, the new colony normally carried over the traditions, the religion and laws of the founding polis. Again, the founding polis would be known as the mother polis or metropolis. And these colonists would, for the most part, remain on very solid relations with the mother city, the metropolis. And the two cities normally favored each other in trade. Now, it was through trade that the Greeks came in contact with other cultures. This is illustrated by the introduction of writing. The Greek alphabet is adapted from a Semitic script, and it is likely that the Greeks acquired their alphabet from contact with Phoenician traders whom they met in the eastern Mediterranean. The Phoenicians were also very active colonizers and traders. Now, colonies exposed the Greek world to new ideas, new religious systems, and as well as new styles of art. The influence of the Near Eastern cultures on the Greeks is so profound that this period is often referred to as the Orientalizing period. And this influence can be seen in the poetry, for example, of Hesiod, who we looked at in the previous unit. And Hesiod, it is believed, incorporates Near Eastern myths and religious ideas into his treatment of the Greek gods in his theogony. And as far as pottery and vase painting goes, there was much influence there, and it is believed that the Greeks, kind of followed this Syrian model of pottery creation. So, to conclude this segment, Greek expansion during the Archaic period would not be surpassed until Alexander the Great's campaigns of conquest in the 4th century BCE. And, of course, Alexander and his Macedonians would establish many Greek cities throughout, vast regions during what was known as the Hellenistic period. But more on that later. For now, we have to shift our focus back to the Greek mainland because, of course, that's where most of the population will remain. And as I mentioned earlier, Greece is a land with very limited resources and certainly limited farmland. So that will trigger endemic competition and endemic warfare amongst the various Greek poleis, the different city-states, each looking to expand its holdings at the expense of its neighbor. And that brings us back to the responsibility of the citizen to defend the polis against all enemies. And this is going to create a system in which showing up on the battlefield becomes an important prerequisite to garnering for yourself greater political representation and a greater voice in government. And these factors will come together in what is broadly referred to by scholars as the Hoplite Revolution. The Hoplite Revolution. In Chapter 1 of Men of Bronze, published in 2013, the late Yale classic scholar Donald Kagan has noted, quote, "The study of war has not only interested military historians from the ancient world to the modern day. Many scholars have held that the way in which societies organize for and fight war lies at the foundation of civilization itself." So warfare and civilization developed hand in hand in historic Greece. In this part of the lecture, we will explore the changes to warfare that occurred in Greece during the Archaic Age, as well as the much-debated theory of a hoplite revolution, which is referenced in your Martin text on pages 79 to 82. So we should begin by looking at the connection between warfare and political power that existed in Bronze Age Greece. Simply put, political participation in the Mycenaean period was determined by showing up on the battlefield. The aristocrats were wealthy enough to outfit themselves with the weapons, armor, horses, and chariots required to perform on Bronze Age battlefields, and therefore claim political legitimacy for themselves and themselves alone, keeping everybody else in a subordinate status. Homer describes battles as duels between heroes with an audience of subordinate warriors looking on in support. Combat between heroes reinforced the perception that these warriors had the right to a privileged position in their society. Indeed, in the Homeric epics, we have to look no further than that dialogue between Sarpedon and Glaucus that we used in an earlier assignment, in which both of these aristoi can claim a superior political status because they are promachoi, frontline fighters. It is believed that this is the way it will be for the 4 centuries of the Mycenaean era, where battles are going to be relatively small-scale affairs fought out by aristocratic champions representing their palaces. And everybody else cannot claim a voice in government because they have not shed blood on behalf of their society. So when iron became more available, it quickly replaced bronze as the predominant material for crafting weapons and tools. It is cheaper, more available, and we see more people with less resources being able to use iron weapons and protective armor. These citizen warriors, called hoplites, organized themselves in a formation called a phalanx. This process could have begun as early as 700 BCE. Now, the question of a hoplite reform in archaic Greece has been hotly debated for decades and remains so today. One group of scholars believe that a revolution in Greek fighting techniques had occurred in the decades around 700 BCE, and debate focused on its nature and socio-political ramifications. 2 views prevailed about how this new system of fighting emerged: sudden change and gradual change. I will spare you the arcane details over the debate between the opposing viewpoints, but both sides agreed that the hoplite system had a major socio-political impact on the Greeks. Whatever its origins, the hoplite phalanx appears to have been the predominant form of fighting in Greece by about 600 BCE. So, the Chigi vase. One key piece of evidence dating the hoplite revolution is what's referred to as the Chigi vase. This was an artifact found in northern Italy, and it has been dated to 650 BCE. And here you see an image taken from that vase, and what you see here is a group of hoplites organizing what will become their trademark formation of a phalanx, and we'll look at that in a moment, the phalanx formation. And they are keeping pace and regulating their speed thanks to the help of a flute player here, who is helping them stay together as a solid block of spears and shields. So this Chigi vase, again dating to 650 BCE, gives us an image of a hoplite phalanx formation in its operational mode. And the artist who painted this must have been familiar enough with the whole concept of hoplite warfare that he could do this by 650 BCE. So, with the aid of modern illustration, let's take a look at what made these hoplites so formidable on the battlefield, and how did they cause a paradigm shift in ancient warfare, away from the more mobile, fluid battles fought by aristoi and chariots, towards a more infantry-based exercise that hoplite battles became. Now, what you see here are the hoplites in various positions and stances with their key pieces of gear. So, hoplite gear. The most important part of a hoplite's panoply, that is his gear, was the aspis, or hoplon, which was a round, bronze-faced, concave shield with a very unique grip that we'll take a look at in a moment. But this type of shield would be worn on the left of the warrior who wielded it, and it would protect roughly half of the warrior and would spill over and protect the right side of his neighbor. And this shield, of course, was heavy enough where a special grip, called an Archaic grip, had to be developed in order for this to work. Now, the Archaic grip refers to a specific way of holding the hoplite shield. The grip involved a handle near the edge of the shield and a leather strap for the forearm in the center. The revolutionary part of the shield was, in fact, the grip. The fact that it is known as an Archaic grip indicates that the Peloponnesian city-state of Argos, which for centuries challenged Sparta's dominance of the Peloponnese, that Argos was an early pioneer in hoplite warfare. The Archaic grip, which you see here, allowed the hoplite to thrust his left arm through the center up to the elbow, so his elbow would be here, and then his left hand would grasp this handhold here. And because this is a very heavy shield, this allows for various muscle groups to be brought into carrying such a burden and to keep it up at eye level. And again, this would protect part of you and part of your neighbor as he scrunched to protect his right side with the left side of your shield. And this made the phalanx formation a related development. After all, you can't really fight as an individual with such a heavy, unwieldy piece of gear. So scholars believe that the development of the hoplon as a shield necessitated the creation of what becomes known as the phalanx formation. So the hoplite helmet. Now, another key piece of gear that was worn by the Greek hoplites would be the Corinthian helmet. As you can see here, it doesn't have any ear holes, but your head and face are very well protected. But because there are no ear holes, we have to surmise that the hoplites fought a very direct and simplistic type of battle. There was no ability to hear multiple commands being shouted out at you in the din of battle. So a hoplite battle must have been a very straight-ahead affair, as indeed the depictions of hoplite battles indicate. So the battles themselves fought in a phalanx formation, and what we see here in this illustration are the hoplites in their phalanx with their Corinthian helmets, their hoplon shields, and their 8 or 9 foot long thrusting spear. Please note that they would not throw the spear because, again, remember, these hoplites are men on a budget. They are middle-class farmers, and they do not want to throw away part of their wealth by throwing away the spear. So their preferred method of fighting is to thrust with the spear and hold on to it in an attempt to inflict wounds upon the enemy in the rival phalanx. In the hoplite battles of the Archaic and Classical ages, the opposing phalanxes lined up on a flat piece of ground. Rough or uneven ground was not conducive to hoplite warfare. It would disrupt the phalanx formation, and therefore that type of terrain would be avoided. So it had to be a flat piece of ground where they could keep their ranks straight and then advance toward one another in a methodical pace. And that's part of the story, that once the phalanx is developed as a formation, and you cannot effectively fight against it if you are in a looser formation. And of course, the phalanx is very handy in dissuading horses from charging you. No horse wants to willingly charge into a wall of spears. So we're looking at a formation that is largely impervious from the front. And of course, it can be outflanked, or it can be taken in the rear, but scholars believe that hoplite warfare was ritualistic, in the sense that if you are representing your city-state, your polis, and you are going out to meet your neighboring polis, one that is encroaching on some of your farmland, you are going to conduct your battle by a set of agreed-upon rules. So, hoplite warfare. We have the accounts of various poets. Archaic and Tertius are the two most cited, who really give us a graphic view of what hoplite warfare would have been like, particularly for those in the front ranks. Indeed, the whole idea was to try to tear a hole in the opponent's phalanx by killing members of the first three ranks of that phalanx, and then driving a wedge that ultimately would cause your opponent's phalanx to collapse. And then the enemy would flee the field, and you would be the victor, and you could retain possession of that land that was being fought over. So it was a very bloody affair for those frontline fighters, but battles didn't tend to take very long. Someone is going to break sooner rather than later. Now, what's called the othismos form of battle, we'll discuss that briefly. As far as what the other rear ranks, the rear five ranks, were doing, well, there is a theory that hoplite battles were very much like a rugby scrum, in the sense that while you have the first three ranks of each of the opposing phalanxes jabbing at each other with their spears, the rear five ranks of each of the phalanxes are literally pushing their comrades forward in an attempt to disrupt and create holes in the enemy's phalanx that could be exploited and ultimately cause your opponent's phalanx to collapse. This, again, is a theory called the othismos theory of hoplite warfare. Othismos itself is a word that translates roughly as to push. And the big debate about this is whether or not this phrase should be taken literally or figuratively. So finally, the political ramifications of the hoplite revolution. Now, the rise of the hoplite was nothing short of a military revolution. The hoplites were generally citizen landowners, people who on average owned between 5 and 10 acres of land, and these farmers constituted about 30 to 40% of the adult male population of a city-state. The hoplites themselves, these middling farmers, by showing up on the battlefields and by showing the kind of courage and bravery that the aristoi thought only they were capable of, well, these middling farmers gained the respect of their wealthier aristocratic counterparts, and that, of course, will translate in a practical manner as greater participation in government and a more prominent role in the affairs of the polis.